My name is London Rain. Thank you for joining me in my new studio. I asked you guys on IG what you want to know about this space and got like 150 questions, so I filtered out what I think is most important and interesting. What we'll talk about today is the signal flow, especially when working with outboard synths, effects, and tape. I'll go over all the gear that I own and how I incorporate it in my creation process, as well as all of the real instruments that I got in the studio. Before we start, I wanted to tell you real quick about the new virtual instrument that I just dropped for a decent sampler called The Creator. It basically lets you layer up to 3 different voices per note with 100 original recordings to choose from per voice. Each voice can be manipulated separately with volume, tune, pan, envelope, filter, and modulation controls. The resulting layered sound can be manipulated even further with the multi-console, which includes 6 different reverbs I sampled from my gear, as well as delay, drive, phaser, chorus, and gain, which gets you sounds like this. If that's something you're interested in, there's a free demo as well as the full version for 10 euros over on my Patreon. Both the links are below. All of this is a one-man operation, so any kind of support really helps me out. Thank you for listening. Let's get into the video. Real quick, Noah asked me to put links to all the gear that I'm using in the description below. I'll definitely try my best to do that. The brain of the studio, besides myself, is my computer. I'm running everything on a 2019 iMac. More details right here if you're interested. I've had it for a few years now. It can handle a lot when it comes to music production. Not so much with video editing. That's why I'm probably switching to a MacBook or a Mac Studio soon, but I really can't complain. I'm very grateful for having this. My Mac is connected to my interface via USB. The interface that I have is the Steinberg UR44. It has 6 ins and 6 outs, as well as 2 headphone outs and MIDI. It has great build quality, it sounds great, it's affordable, and it's easy to use, and that's basically all I'm looking for in an interface. Several things are connected to my interface, starting with my headphones. These are the Beyerdynamic DT770 Pro. Again, affordable, great sound and build quality. 99% of the time I'm creating or mixing, I have these on. Rarely use my monitors for any of that stuff, so they really get used a lot and I never had any issues. I got a question about home studio essentials, and I think this right here will be it for me. You could even scrap the interface and go straight into the PC with your headphones and use your phone as a mic. The next thing that's connected to my interface are my monitors. I use the Yamaha HS8s. They're great, but way too big for this space. I mainly use them to remic instruments, vocals, or drums to capture the reverb of this room. To answer the acoustic treatment question real quick, I don't have any, and I don't really intend to change that for the very reason that I'm using the reverb of this room all the time. I don't do any critical listening or mixing with my monitors in here. I don't need to do super dry recording, so I kind of just leave it open the way it is. And the speakers are sideways because I like the way it looks. Ethan asked me about the next piece of equipment to get after the monitors, which I think should be a MIDI keyboard. For people that aren't really into music theory, it can really help to visualize notes, chords, scales, etc. I also cannot stress enough the difference between the feel of playing something in on your computer keyboard, which I've done, versus an actual MIDI keyboard like this one. I use the KeyStep 32 by Arturia, which is connected to my computer via USB. Again, affordable, practical, and really good quality. I think you can start to see a pattern here with the essential stuff that I buy. Connected to that, I have a sustain pedal by M Audio, which, if you don't know what that is, lets you hold or sustain notes without actually holding them down on the keyboard. Outputs 3 and 4 of my interface are dedicated to send audio out of my DAW to the Tascam Portastudio 424 Mark I, which I use as a regular tape recorder, a distributor of audio signals, and an effects unit. The way I turned this into an effect is by connecting a 3-head tape deck to the effects send of the Portastudio, monitoring the tape output of the tape deck, which gets sent to a separate track on the Portastudio, which creates a tape echo effect with feedback control. Heimbach made a whole video about how to do this. The link is below if you're interested. Next up in the signal chain is the Dynacord Eminent 100, which is fed by the headphone output of the Portastudio. I use this as kind of a summing mixer for all of my synths, as well as a distortion and echo effect. I distort a signal simply by boosting the input gain or really pushing the bass, which just sounds really dope on this mixer. The echo is actually built in the form of a tape loop and 4 tape heads that are separately adjustable in volume. I really use it all the time on whatever kind of instrument. It just sounds really fire. Each one of the 6 channels on the Dynacord has a dedicated synth, except for channel 6, which gets the Portastudio signal. On channel 1, I have the Yamaha TG33, really cool and and unusual vector synth. On channel 2 is the Moog Grandmother, which is actually the first synth I ever bought. BLT asked me how good the Moog actually is, and I can honestly say it's amazing. It's by far my favorite synth out of the ones that I own. The fact that it's semi-modular, which means you're able to patch stuff within the synth, makes it really fun to explore sounds and puts almost no limits on what you're able to create even without any knowledge in synthesis. On channel 3 lives the Micro Freak by Arturia, which would be my answer to this question. It's affordable and comes with presets, so you're able to just start right away, but also has a ton of features which allow sound exploration and customization, which I'm a huge fan of. Thank you again to Arturia for sending this to me. On channel 4 I have the AKG SG01V, which is basically like a collection of famous synths in a box. Really cool for quick inspiration. Last but not least, on channel 5 is the Casiotone MT240. This one was super cheap and doesn't really come with a lot of sounds, but still fun to play around with for sure. I wanted to be able to not only play the actual synths live, but also to program MIDI chords or melodies in my DAW and send those over to the synthesizer. So I got this Kenton through 5. It receives MIDI information via a MIDI cable from my interface and distributes that information to everything that it's connected to, which are all of my synthesizers. So just to give you an example, I might program a melody in my DAW, send that to the Moog with Logic's external instrument utility. I press record and now I have my hands free and can mess with the settings on the Moog or an effects unit while the audio is recording back, which is really cool. Everything that comes out of the Dynacord goes into the Yamaha EMX 150, which serves multiple purposes. First, it has a lot more EQ control than a Dynacord, which I usually use to get signals to sound as good as possible before printing them in the DAW. So for example, some stuff might sound a little muddy, so I'll take down the mids. If it's too harsh, I'll take down the highs and so on. It's not that different from just using an EQ inside your DAW, but I really like the workflow and the feel, and I like training my ears to hear frequencies that I don't like and treating those frequencies without any visual help. Second use of the EMX is its built-in delay, which sounds really fire. Third, because it has an effect send, I use it to send signals through my Elysis Quadraverb. I saw this unit in one of Heimbach's videos as well, and I really messed with the sound, so I got on eBay and got lucky, got one for about 50 euros, and it has a bunch of really cool presets, sound really dope. I use it all the time. This also answers Amani's question where I get all of my gear. It's really all from eBay. The EMX is then connected to inputs 3 and 4 of my interface to kind of close the circuit. Alright, so now we covered this whole area right here. The only thing that's missing outboard gear wise is my tape machine. I have the Uher Royal Deluxe because it just costs a little over 100 euros and has a built-in tape echo, which is really cool. The only thing that's really annoying about it are the connectors that this machine uses, but sadly that's mostly what you'll find if you're looking for low budget tape machines. I don't have a specific one that I can recommend, but I personally would look for one with cinch or line in and output. Now these right here are some old German DIN in and out connectors. I actually can't even tell you the exact names of these cables. I just went to the internet and searched for old DIN adapters and cables for the Uher Royal Deluxe. I got both of these adapters with cinch connectors at the end to be able to use cinch to line adapters to connect them to my interface. This machine doesn't really handle harsh peaks like from a piano or digital drums that well, so I mainly use it to saturate strings, synths, winds, etc. I also like running stuff through it while touching the roller or the reel to introduce some cool warbles and glitches to the signal. It also sounds really dope recording stuff onto the tape, then rewinding and playing it back at half speed. There's just a lot you can do with this. I personally love what it does to the sound, and it's actually not just collecting dust. I use it all the time. If you want to know more about tape, I made a whole video dedicated to it a while ago. The link's below if you're interested. Now that we went over all of the gear, you might have noticed I don't actually use a patch bay, which I probably will in the future for workflow reasons. I don't have any pedals except for a distortion pedal, which I don't use anymore. This setup isn't movable at all. Everything has its purpose and its place, and it is what it is. My favorite reverb is my room. My favorite hardware is my tape machine, and to cable management, all I can say is
I don't have that answer, and I usually have every answer.
Before we get into the instruments, I want to go over the mics that I have real quick. So the one that I use for literally anything is the Rode NT1A. It's able to transfer stuff into the digital realm exactly the way I hear it in real life. That's all I really need, so that's all I really use. I also have this AKG D5, which I mainly use for making videos. I got it because it's really cheap and it just does what a mic does. It's a dynamic mic, so it's less sensitive and picks up less room reverb compared to the condenser, which just helps my voice to be a little more intelligible. The only other mics that I'm using are these Uher M534, which connect to my tape machine directly and allow me to do stereo recording straight to tape. It's definitely cool to experiment with, but haven't really used them in a while. The last thing that I want to talk about today are the instruments that I have in here besides the synth. Starting off with an electric guitar by Harley Benton. This is my first and only electric guitar. My parents gave it to me many years ago. It just sounds like an electric guitar and that's all I really need, so I never really considered buying another one. Next up is an electric bass by Harley Benton as well. I got this about 2 years ago because it was cheap and I wasn't really satisfied with electric bass plugins anymore. Again, it sounds like a bass, it does what it does. This acoustic guitar was my first guitar ever. I don't know who makes it. I got it from my parents as well. It's probably my favorite acoustic instrument that I own. I got this violin after really getting into samples to just have that string texture in my toolbox. It was the cheapest one on Thomann. I still don't really know how to play, but I use it all the time and I really love the way it sounds. Next up is a Taisho Godo, which I got from a guy in Japan on eBay. It just looked and sounded interesting to me. Definitely not an instrument that fits on every track. I only really use it if I want that specific sound. Besides tapes, talk books, and other stuff, I keep all of my percussion inside of this box. Again, I just got the cheapest of everything to just have those sounds available. I also have 2 kalimbas. One E-kalimba that I built myself by cutting out a hole and putting a pickup inside of it. It was a really fun project and it's really cool to be able to run the kalimba into my outboard effects directly. I also have this acoustic kalimba by Hokema, which costs a little more but sounds amazing. Besides the synths, my wind instruments were the ones that I got the most questions about, so here's what I have. First up is this recorder that I got from my mom. It just sounds the way a recorder sounds. Not really that much depth, dynamics, or beauty to it. That's why I love it. Kardashev.codex asked me about a good beginner flute, and this is definitely it. There's no real technique you need to learn to be able to play it, so every flute that kind of works in that way is a flute I would recommend for a beginner to kind of get into winds. Next is this kind of piccolo flute, I would call it. I got this on a flea market for $1 and it's really cool to have for that higher, sweeter wind sound. But this specific one is a terrible instrument and it just takes a lot of time to get a good sound out of it. Next up are 2 very similar sounding instruments. The black one is a Saffoon, the other one a Saxonet. They both kind of sound like a sax, which is why they're called pocket sax as well. The Saffoon definitely sounds a little more damp, while the Saxonet has some more high-end harmonics. I wouldn't really recommend these to a beginner because they're not the easiest to play, but they really sound incredible as soon as you kind of figure it out. Last but not least is this Xiao flute. This is the first flute I ever bought and I instantly fell in love with how warm it sounds and how strong of a character it has. I really use it all the time and it's definitely my favorite out of the wind instruments that I own. There are a lot of questions that I got that I couldn't talk about today because they just didn't fit in the video. But here are some helpful videos I made already regarding those topics. First, I talk about anything mixing and recording related on my Between Layers episodes. There's a whole playlist on my channel if you're interested. Second is my video editing, which I dedicated a whole part of my latest sample breakdown video to. So definitely check out the end of that video if you want to know about the camera that I use, how I edit my videos, and all of that. For any other questions, please just leave them in the comments. I really want to make more long form content like this again, so if you want me to make a video about anything specific like how I make my decent sampler libraries, just leave all of that in the comments as well. As always, I really appreciate you taking your time watching this and I'll see you soon. Love. You know that you're toxic.